So I want to talk about the uh, potential 28 um, presidential election contenders that might show up after the midterms. Now, I expect that because the typical um, time frame for announcements for presidential campaigns is in um, January, February, March into the summer of the year after a midterm election. So we'll probably see some people start coming out and announcing their runs for 28 in that time frame. So in the next several months. So, but it will be after the midterms, of course. As far as the midterms go, it'll be a separate video on that, more in depth. There's a lot of issues, a lot of nuances, and very interesting things that are going to be happening in the midterms. Um, but as far as 2028 contenders go, on the Republican side, you have a dynamic that is very interesting because you have the establishment anti-Trump wing, a lot of whom have moved over to the Democratic Party or have supported Democrats or just generally aren't aren't there anymore, aren't there in as much as they were between 2016 and 2018 when the Russia hoax was the biggest issue um, out there. And the impeachments, well, the impeachments came later, but you still had some of those establishment figures uh, being a problem during the impeachment nonsense. As far as a candidate on that wing of the party, I can't really think of anyone that would have a strong level of support among Republicans in general. I would say that someone like Nikki Haley might be someone that the kind of the establishment Republican segment of the the Republican voter base would go for. But even then, she's already lost. She will not have the respect among the MAGA base that you're going to need in order to win the primary. Because remember, she only served for a year as the ambassador to the UN uh, under Trump in 2017. She doesn't have much connection there. And you're going to need something in order to bring the coalition of voters, Republican voters, together to win that primary. It goes without question, really, I think, that the MAGA base of the Republican Party is the largest, the plurality of voters. Now, I don't know a really good number, if there is any good numbers as to how much of the Republican voter base is quote unquote MAGA. Personally, I consider myself MAGA aligned. I don't think I'm like full throated MAGA supporter, but I generally do support a lot of President Trump's agenda. As for his personality, which is one thing that I think distinguishes me from quote unquote MAGA, his style leaves many things to be desired. And this whole Iran conflict and how it's developed has really turned me off to um, the way that Trump has handled foreign policy, at least in regards to Iran. Now, and of course, later on, this whole issue with South Korea, I'm scratching my head. I don't know what's going on there. But so, as far as being MAGA or MAGA aligned, certainly consider myself more MAGA aligned rather than like straight up MAGA. So, just so you understand where my bias might be. As far as that anti-Trump establishment kind of figure, I'm looking at someone like a Nikki Haley, although I don't think it will be Nikki Haley, and I frankly don't think there is anyone in the Republican Party right now that is going to be able to garner that cross coalition support. Okay. Um, Polling that has been released for the 2028 Republican presidential nomination, which I don't hold much stock in because no one is even announced, and it is still 2 years away from the election, 1 year away from 1+ years away from the primaries. So there's no real reason to focus on that, but you can see consistently that Vance has a massive edge over any other potential contender. It's almost a guarantee that JD Vance will announce that he's running for president. And that is the bar that anyone else is going to have to reach in order to win, is competing with that popularity. Being a sitting vice president, you are going to inherit a large share, but not the entirety of that MAGA coalition that got Trump elected twice. Okay. Um, Now, I'm not going to go too much into detail on what Vance should do, needs to do in order to win the primaries. I personally don't want Vance to win the primaries. That's not why I'm saying I don't want to go into detail on what he needs to do. Just so discussion for a later time. As far as contenders, what I'm looking at is if Vance has the backing. Let me rephrase that. If the administration is doing well enough that a competitor is not going to be seen as a viable alternative for the Trump administration by the voter base, Vance is going to run away with it. The only question is whether someone else from inside the Trump administration runs against Vance in the primary. Obviously, I'm talking about Marco Rubio. His name has been out there. Um, it is I am very much not sure of whether he's going to run or not. And it really, I think, depends on where the Trump administration goes in the next year or so, because I think Marco Rubio could announce as late as September, October, maybe even November in of 2027, and still run a significant challenge campaign of challenging JD Vance for the nomination. Now, I think that what would what might lead to that is if the foreign policy of President Trump leans more towards the JD Vance approach of isolationism. If that happens and this whole Iran issue either ends up being a complete bust and not solving anything about the Strait of Hormuz or the Iranian regime or just the status quo of their missile technology and the nuclear material still being rubble, if nothing is solved, okay, JD Vance is going to be at a huge deficit, and it might lead to either the the anti-Trump establishment type figure um, gaining popularity, Rubio potentially gaining popularity, or the other option, which I'll talk about in a moment, the isolationist right. Um, and then, you know, but if the administration doesn't go the Vance route of isolationism and tends after the midterms, as I suspect might happen, towards a more uh, uh, aggressive foreign policy, i.e., kinetic military action against Iran, with the aim to finally destabilize the regime enough for it to collapse, and which is what I think should have happened right away. Um, then that's going to probably favor Marco Rubio if he were to run, because that no doubt will be successful. And I don't have the time to get into why I believe that here, but I do believe that if you have a dedicated mission to collapse the regime, no ground force is necessary. That will be successful. That will, in the end, be incredibly popular among the American people, and I'll get into why that might be in probably in the next video. So, as far as the establishment anti-Trump candidate, Vance, Rubio, obviously, out of those three, the likelihood is that Vance is going to have a relatively easy path to the nomination. Now, there is one other wing of the Republican Party. I really even hesitate to call it a wing of the Republican Party. I'll explain why here in a moment. But there is that isolationist, um, anti-Israel um, wing that has really developed over the last 3 years or so. I mean, honestly, since October 7th, this has gone from not even an issue to now we have these open conspiracy nuts talking about how Israel controls everything and blah, blah, blah. It's like this has really exploded among some elements of the right. Now, when you talk about Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan and Nick Fuentes, who I hate saying his name, I despise the man, and the others, Marjorie Taylor Greene, all the rest of them, those voices don't represent really the majority of the Republican Party. And in fact, they're speaking out. Oh, I forgot to mention another one, Candace Owens. Um, those people are speaking out not because they speak for the Republican Party, but because they've been largely ostracized. Now, Joe Rogan's not even a Republican. I don't even know if he has a real political ideology. He just says stupid shit, whatever's on his mind, regardless of whether it's grounded in fact or not. I don't listen to his podcast. I don't listen to really anything except uh, incidentally, if I am reading a news story or listening to another podcast in which they have a clip of him. So I can't really speak on how he is in totality, but he just generally sounds like a conspiracy nut. I know he's in league with Alex Jones, who is this conspiracy nutcase who still believes that 9/11 was an inside job, despite all of the evidence, all of the debunking of all of those claims. This is not a wing of the Republican Party. This is just people that are latching on to a name, MAGA, and trying to make something of it for themselves personally uh, by claiming something that they have no business claiming. You know, when you have people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson going to Russia and proclaiming the greatness of the Russian people and the Russian society and all that, it's like they're clearly being paid to do something like this. They're clearly being paid off. They're getting, and that's not necessarily illegal or anything. I'm not saying that they're doing anything fraudulent. In terms of the law, they might be doing it fraudulent in terms of ideology, but regardless, what they're doing is that they're just saying whatever they're being paid to do. Now, Candace Owens, not going to get into that too much. I think she ended up having a mental disorder, and really feel bad for her because I used to listen to some of the things that Candace Owens did when she was part of Daily Wire. Some of the one film in particular about George Floyd that she did. I forgot the name of it, but I thought that was a really good expose of what actually happened. Now, after that, when October 7th happened, then she went off on this anti-Israel tirade. It's like she lost her mind for whatever reason. And it's really sad because I mean she was good and then she had some sort of mental break. I don't know what happened. That's what I suspect is a mental illness of some sort. I don't know. Um, but in any case, that's the only one of the conspiracy nut cases out there that I think would that I have any sort of like feelings sympathy for really. But yeah, you're gonna have someone on that wing of the wing of the Republican Party. It's not really there. That's going to try and claim sort of the MAGA base. Um, be very isolationist and very much anti-Israel, kind of all this nonsense. Um, I think it's more of a populist messaging. I think that's mixed with some quite a bit of isolationist ideas, and also um, whether or not they realize it, whether or not they're propagandized to or using the propaganda of foreign entities to push a narrative that just simply isn't true. And that being that Israel controls everything and blah blah blah. Oh, APEC. I mean, I'm not going to go too much into this, but I cannot believe how absurd the anti-APEC nonsense is. They claim like the claim that it's Israel controlling our elections. No, these are American citizens, most of whom are Jews, but not all of them, who are involved in an organization that, much like any other organization out there funding campaigns, has a bias, has a an interest that they are pushing for and funding candidates who align more with their interest. To single out APAC and not mention all the others, the China dark money, the Islamist dark money. I mean, look at El Said, Michigan Senate candidate, Democrat Michigan Senate candidate. Look at his campaign finances and like, wow, there's literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of donations from Islamist oriented individuals and organizations, and no one talks about that. No one talks about. They just talk about, oh, APAC. Well, um, I think it would be wise at this point for candidates in the Republican Party to say to APAC privately that it is best if you do not spend money, because while I support, you know, uh, Israel's defense and its security and our alliance with each other, okay, that just is going to lead to unnecessary um, questions about where someone's allegiance lies right now in this environment. Because, like, just because you get APAC funding, oh, you're bought and paid for by Israel. Give me a friggin' break. It is so ridiculous. It is so ridiculous. Excuse me. But in any case, you are going to get a candidate like that, um, who will probably not make it very far in the primaries. The Republican base is not represented by the loudest voices. Now, later on, I'll get into what I think the Republican Party in general needs to do to speak to the American people at large, not just the Republican Party base, but the American public at large. Now, on the Democrat side, I think that's going to be an interesting story too, because they're not doing well. They're not doing well at all. You're going to get a DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, i.e., neo-communists. You're going to get one of those. You're going to either have AOC, who is the most likely to represent that wing of the Democratic Party. You might have a more centrist kind of, I hesitate to even say old school liberal, because there really are no old school liberals in the Democratic Party anymore. If they do exist, they are typically Republicans or that anti-Trump Republican crowd that has maybe recently shifted over to the Democrats, or maybe recently shifted over into, the just being independents. But the old school liberals don't really exist in the Democratic Party, which is part of the problem, because when you have the Democratic Party is simply a party of neo Marxism or leftism, but not liberalism. Because think about this notion of woke 1.0, which is no different than woke 2.0. Don't get sucked into the notion that, oh, these democratic socialists have reformed their messaging. So give me a friggin' break. No, they haven't. They still believe the same old crap. They still hate the police. They still think white people are evil. They still want DEI. Like, I don't want to get into another tangent, but the degree to which DEI is itself racist as hell is so ridiculous. And the fact that no one is talking about that fact is absurd. DEI is fucking racist. It's racist, plain and simple. Okay? If you have to say that a minority needs a leg up to compete with the white person, that is implying that they cannot do it on their own. That is saying that they have an inherent disadvantage. And how is that not racist bullshit? Give me a break. Anyway, as far as a Democrat candidate, you're going to have AOC most likely. She's definitely pushing in that direction. On the kind of lefty, moderate lefty, Pete Buttigieg might run. He has been relatively out of the news as of late, and he's one of those candidates that I think might have the background. I have to do more research into him. I've forgotten about him. He's really a non-factor in my mind, but he does kind of own that moderate left position. I believe in 6, no, I forget when it was, 2020, was he involved in the debates? I don't remember. He was involved in one of the debates, 2016 or 2020, I don't remember which. uh, and he said certain things that, no, it had to be 2016, that sounded more moderate. He attacked another Democrat on that stage for saying something that was like too far left. Was it Beto O'Rourke on guns or something there? I don't remember specifically. So he might own that moderate left spot, which would generally put him at an advantage because that might speak to a wider portion of the American people in general. But I don't think he's going to have much of a shot unless he moves to the left, to the neo Marxist DEI kind of crowd, uh, in the Democratic Party. I think that is the plurality of the Democratic Party in terms of their coalition, right? Um, of course, you have Gavin Newsom, the slick politician that's going to try and thread his way back and forth in between all different, different segments of the Democratic Party and independents, and he's going to play his role, trying to be that seedy, shady, snake-like, fork-tongued politician. Is it going to work? Is that going to get him the Democratic nomination? It might. It depends on how poor the other candidates are among the Democratic voting population. Um, I am not a Democrat, never have been, and I really cannot say with any degree of certainty how true that might be. Um, I would say that he might do well with minorities in the Democratic Party who aren't necessarily the neo Marxist types, which is an interesting thing, when you recognize, like, for example, Joe Biden in 2016 got the nomination, kind of locked it up when a black leader, Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, endorsed Joe Biden and he won the South Carolina primaries. And the minority voters among the Democratic Party, who are typically, it doesn't appear they're as leftist as white Democrats, pretty much gave that a nomination to Biden. Kind of locked it up in South Carolina and went on from there. I think that kind of thing may happen for one of these candidates that can appeal to more of the minority base in the Democratic Party, but I'm not sure. So, um, uh, you know, as far as the general election is concerned, one of those things that Republicans have not done well and continue to not do well outside of President Trump in 2016 and 2024 is appealing to Latinos and Black people, even though there's good reason why they should support the Republican Party and not the Democratic Party. That case simply is not made well in Republican circles, and it's been a perennial issue with the only breakthrough being Donald Trump. So we will see whether that paradigm continues to shift. Um, excuse me, but I hope for that, but my I'm tempering my hopes with a reality check because either way you go, this presidential election cycle, either you're going to have um, a Democrat, socialist aligned, someone that's on the far left, okay, or you're going to have a JD Vance. And both those things um, come with a cost. Obviously, the leftist socialist communist is the greater cost and something to be avoided with, don't even touch it with a 60-foot pole, whatever the phrase is, right? But Vance comes with his own costs. We really can't afford uh, an isolationist agenda so much. I mean, obviously, we certainly can't afford neo-communists completely destroying our country, but as far as you know, whether you like it or not, the United States is connected to the world. Now, I'm no fan of quote unquote international law or much of the crap that the world foists on America in general or foists on other countries in the international system. But that doesn't mean that we just take a step back and do absolutely nothing. We use our power, economic and otherwise, to force changes, whether that means getting out of the UN, which is not itself seceding from or seceding from like the world politics. But if we were to get out of the UN, for example, it would force the UN to shift its cost burden elsewhere, and it would probably destabilize the UN enough that other countries would likely not see it as a as much of a uh, authoritative voice on anything, right? In any case, that's for a separate video. So that's really what I'm looking at for 2028, these different coalitions and what candidates might speak to different elements of those coalitions. So really, I see a Nikki Haley type for the Republican Party being on the left or on the center right anti-Trump wing. I see J.D. Vance is taking most that MAGA crowd. If Marco Rubio gets involved, they're going to be wrangling for that kind of thing, that kind of area. I don't think DeSantis is going to run. Not, I don't think DeSantis is going to make that same mistake this time around. He's probably going to be looking for a vice presidential nomination for whoever wins the presidential nomination, and we'll see if he does get that. And then, of course, you'll have someone like a Thomas Massey running. I don't know who exactly would take that spot. They're not likely to have much leeway on the isolationist anti-Israel wing of cliff of the Republican Party. On the Democratic side, you'll have AOC and Gavin Newsom. Those two are obviously vying, positioning themselves for a political run. And then, oh, excuse me, I got to cut that one out. And then you might have someone like Pete Buttigieg, although I don't think it will be he himself running in that moderate vein, kind of going after the neo-socialists, neo-communists, and trying to pull the Democratic Party more towards the center while still being the progressive candidate that 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 will get that can still get votes from the Democratic base. That would be a very tough needle to thread, really. And so there's my opinion. Thank you for listening.